Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Denzil Meyrick. Denzil has written 11 DCI Daley books, many standalones too, and he's back with a brand new novel, Murder at Holly House. We discuss how his work in the police and directing companies, being very busy, how that influenced his writing. Also, how his routine is mainly to simply sit down and try and get on with it. And you can hear why Murder at Holly House is something a little unusual for him.
And I thought, well, it's good to write something uplifting at Christmas time. And I wouldn't want to do it all the time. But then again, I don't want to write the same kind of books all the time anyway, whether I don't really believe in being I'm always referred to as a Scottish crime writer. I would rather just be referred to as a writer, because I could come out with something that isn't really crime at all, and I have done. And this, again, it's this need to pigeonhole people, to label them and put them in a box. I'm not good at boxes.
It's all on the way in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Welcome along. My name's Dan Simpson, and this is Writer's Routine, where we take a look through an author's working day, the show that hopefully peels back the curtain and lets you in to see some of the secrets and learn some tips and get tricks that will help you plan your day, your work, your life around what you want to write. Now, something that can help out with that is our sponsors for this week's show, the brilliant writing software Plotter. We've got a fantastic offer that you can make the most of over at go.plotter.com/routine. While you're there, you get 10% off this software. Plotter is a writing tool that, does what it says. It plots. It helps you plan your books the way that you think, letting you outline faster, organise smarter, and it will turbocharge your productivity with a digital corkboard with colour-coded notes and paths and threads on there. Makes it really easy for you to get a lot of detail into your timeline, the outline, your notes, the details on characters and places, and it makes it very simple for you to chop, change, pick them up, move them here and there and swap them however you like. Plotter helps you spend more time writing and less time worrying about everything else. If you are a bit like me as a writer, when I try to be a writer, and you get absorbed by the faff, the window dressing, well, I think Plotter will really help you out with that. It helps you strip it back to see what is important. In our chat that you'll hear in a second with Denzil, he is very keen to remember what he's there to do, that there's a lot of fuss that gets in the way of just sitting down and writing a story. So we'll touch on that in a second, and Plotter really helps you sort that out. The best way for you to see what it does, how stunning it looks and how helpful it can be is by getting to go.plotter.com and taking a look around. And while you're there, as I say, you can get 10% off the software with this show. To get the deal, use the code that is in the episode notes wherever you're listening. It's over at go.plotter.com/routine. Now, this week we are chatting to Denzil Meyrick. Denzil has published 11 DCI Daley books and is now taking a little break from that type of crime story. Many more standalone novels too. And he's back with another one, Murder at Holly House, where we head back to December 1952. A dead stranger has been found stuffed up the chimney of the historic Holly House, and Inspector Frank Grasby is dispatched to investigate. And then snow soon cuts him off. There is another dead body that turns up, and we find ourselves in a locked room mystery. We discuss how he deals with that baggy middle. Also, how to not be too concerned when you've not hit your word goal for the day. We chat through why The Sopranos is incredibly inspirational and why the main goal for Denzil is to avoid anything that might delay the actual writing. So hopefully there is quite a thorough routine in there. Let's find out with Denzil Meyrick, and we start things off as we always do with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
I see before me a poster of Churchill, who never, ever give up, that kind of thing. I've got a large print of a scene of Tower Bridge, and out the window I can see trees and a bright blue autumnal sky at the moment.
So there are a few things there that I imagine jogs some inspiration. The quote from Churchill, you have the Tower Bridge picture beside you too. Is there anything that kind of lets you know what you're there to do? I'm talking plot points. Have you got post-it notes, a whiteboard, anything like that?
No. I'm one of these writers who does it in a very simple fashion. Probably one of your worst guests from that point of view, because I see writing as a very simple process, and I don't have whiteboards. I don't use note. I have notes as I go along, but I don't have any kind of staged. I know writers that have chapter by chapter plotting, and I don't do any of these things. I just literally sit down in front of the laptop and write. So for your purposes, that's not very exciting, is it?
Well, it's not. I think the exciting part is that it can be done in any way. And that actually some of the inspiration comes from the fact that whereas a lot of writers that I chat to will need precise situations and precise views around them, maybe that's window dressing and you're able to just sit there and get the words out without too much drama at all, Denzil.
Yeah, I think it's because I come from business. And when you're in business, you don't get time to organise your office just to suit your mood or put on your favourite track, and things have to be done instantaneously, and you've got to respond to what's happening at the time. And so, I try not to make too much of a song and dance about it. And I see it very much as something to be done externally. Internally, it's a different matter. Internally, I always see a running picture in my head of what I'm doing. And interestingly enough, when I've gone back to, for whatever reason, to look at books that I wrote 10, 11 years ago, and I read them, I get exactly the same pictures in my head that I did when I was writing them, which I find quite strange.
How much truck do you give for perhaps someone who really struggles to get stuff down because everything isn't just right, when you come from a background where it doesn't matter if things are just right, you've got a job, you need to get it done, so get to it. How much sympathy do you have?
I don't think it's a case of sympathy. I think everyone, we're all individuals, and individuals like to do things in different ways, and vive la différence, if you like. However, I do think that it's some first-time writers read a lot of this stuff and they say, oh no, I've got to have my whiteboard. I've got to have my post-it notes. I've got to have a detailed plan and plot of what I'm doing. And they spend so much. I know 2 or 3 people who have sought advice from me foolishly. And they've become really bogged down in this preparation thing to an extent that it stopped them from sitting down and writing the book. And from that point of view, I think that's a shame. So I think it obviously has its merits and it has its demerits, and it's up to you how you want to go about it. But really and truly, at the end of the day, simplicity is all, as far as I'm concerned.
Every author I've spoken to doing the show has always mentioned the moment, the wall, the baggy middle where you're feeling a bit lost and you aren't sure how this is going to carry on. Just because it is, you were talking about that internal process. It just becomes quite tricky. How do you deal with that coming from a practical attitude such as the one you have?
I think that I know what you mean about this baggy middle kind of thing, but when I sit down to write a book, Dan, I have an idea. I have a beginning and a middle and an end in my mind. And by no means is that set in stone. So what I find is the so-called baggy middle can sometimes be the part of the book that changes, against the way I was expecting it to be. But I never really get bogged down in anything, and I just sort of plow through. I always know where I'm going and where I want to get to. So from that point of view, it's, I work a lot with characterization and a lot with dialogue. And, you just, in the terms of the daily books that I've written, 11 of, you just resort to character at times of stress or not knowing what to do, and I find your characters will always get you out of that kind of thing, and especially when you've been writing a long term series, the way I have, and you got so much to refer back to, and that helps you through the process. But you always keep the end goal in mind of the end of the book and how you want that book to end. And again, that's not set in stone either. So I can sit down with a thread of an idea, beginning, middle, and end, and when I've finished, it works out entirely different.
How much have you noticed that part of it getting easier then? You mentioned relying and touching on characterization. Well, as you say, you've done 11 daily books. You know these characters pretty well. Do you remember noticing a moment through writing them when you thought, oh, okay, I know these so well now that if I am at a sticky point, I can check in with them and they might help me out of this tunnel I've found myself down?
Yeah, that it has plus and minus points like everything else in life, really. The plus is that you know these characters so well that they take very little time to put on the page. In a certain circumstance, I know what D.S. Scott will say to Jim Daley. I know what Jim Daley will be thinking, and I know what Hamish I'll be thinking. I know what Ella will be wondering about, or their reaction to something. But then, on the minus side, you drag this whole world with you, and all that's happened in it since you began writing it. And if you have it's not harmful to have a character behave out of character, if you like, because they're doing it for a reason in the book. And as long as you're doing it that way, that's fine. But if suddenly you've got Brian Scott, who notoriously hates books and my daily novels, suddenly, oh yes, I can't wait to go for a sale. That's just a very simplistic example. But you've got to be cognizant of the fact that you've written that before, and he has that character aspect. And so you have to be very careful that each person that you write stays constant throughout the way they've been before. And you've got to, I spent ages writing the last daily novel, trying to remember what I'd written as Brian Scott's brother's occupation, believe it or not. And I was convinced he was a plumber. And then after much delving through various books by myself and my wife, we found out he was an electrician. So you have all that kind of baggage with you that you've got to be very aware of. So on one hand, you know your characters off by heart. You know how they feel, as though they're yourself, in other words. But then you've got to be very careful that you don't write anything out of context and isn't part of, I suppose you'd say, canon, really. Otherwise, you're in trouble.
Have you ever considered putting together quite a detailed encyclopedia or dramatis personae, whatever they call it? So you just need to flick back and think, oh, what's everything I know about this one again before you crack on?
Well, I can guarantee that if you do that, you'll miss something out, and the very thing that you were wanting to know or find out about them won't be there. And again, it's another thing that delays you from writing the book, as far as I'm concerned. And it doesn't happen often enough to me for it to justify so much work in doing this sort of, I think people call it their character Bible, don't they? And I tend not to do that. And I think when you're writing one of these books a year, or the daily books a year, you're still always very close to it. I think if I took I'm in a sort of break from daily at the moment, the next daily won't be out until 2025. Because of other projects like Murder at Holly House, which is coming out just in a week or so's time. Then when I go back to write that, which I'll begin sometime next year, I may find it more difficult because there's been that space, that a year nearly since I wrote the last one. Yeah, but I'll have to see. But that's what editors are for, isn't it? They should know all these things.
Touching on the meta for a second, and I wonder how this will play out. So you know your characters. We'll get to the new novel in just a second. I know that is outside of your daily books, but you know the characters in your daily stories incredibly well. How much are they existing, kind of in the background, doing their own thing and changing from book to book? Like, if you didn't think of a reason for you to tell their story in A Breath on Dying Embers or Jeremiah's Bell or one of these stories, like, are they naturally doing things between novels that you're aware with, and it's just a case of catching up yourself when you start writing a new one?
That's a very good point, but I really kind of, the books are even though I don't have them set in time, if you like, I don't, there's not a specific time, and so characters don't age the way they would in normal life, and they don't, I don't say, well, this is the 4th of December 2021 or whatever. My novels are the daily novels are pretty consecutive. So a few weeks after one finishes, or a couple of months, the next one begins, sort of thing. So you get that idea of continuity throughout. And even as though it's unlikely in real life, I mean, we're not talking about real life, we're talking about fiction. And so they change very little in between when we last saw them as to when we next see them. However, now that I'm having a hiatus from Daley, that will be what you mentioned will be a case, and will be interesting to know, and things will have changed from the last book that people have read, and it will be interesting how I do that. But I've not done it yet, so I can't tell you. But as soon as I tell you, I'll let you know. I try to write in an ideal world Monday to Friday, and I try to keep as close to office hours as I can, and that's not always possible, of course, but it's my kind of a kernel, the kernel of what I do. So in the morning, I shall wake up and struggle into life, and the first kind of worky thing I'll do is to check my emails and write any relevant responses. I do that twice in the day. I do it once in the morning, 3 times actually. Once in the morning, once at lunchtime, and once in the sort of as it approaches evening, because I get so many emails these days, and Zooms and everything else, because I'm involved also with the daily television show. So that's what I do. Then I move on to social media. I try to engage with whoever's written to me in the last 24 hours, whether it be on Facebook or X or Instagram or whatever particular platform it's been on. Get that done, and then I have a small pause for a cup of tea or something, and then I sit down writing. And my aim every day is to get at least 2,000 words down. And there are days that doesn't always work, but more often than not, it works. And I feel naggingly disappointed if I don't get that 2,000 words down. I think a lot of writers are like that. You feel as though you've failed in some respect. And then these days there are Zoom calls, the pleasure of talking to people like yourself, interviews, articles to write, scripts to read, all that kind of stuff goes on as well. And so you've got to be careful you're not overwhelmed by things, and leave a space for your writing. And I'm someone who always tries to get writing done as early as possible. I'm not a good afternoon writer. If I'm to start something at 2:00 in the afternoon, I'm not good at that. I'm out of my routine, and it grinds with me, and I am unlikely to reach my 2,000 word target. So that's that. I write until I finish the 2K words, and then I go back onto something else and to finish the day.
How concerned are you at the quality of those 2,000 words the first time around?
Not really at all, because I either in the reviewing process once I've written the first draft, or in the editing process when I get to that point with an editor, I tend not a lot changes. And so my first drafts are very, very like the books that come out, that, if I was to hand you the first draft of my last novel and you were to read the actual novel itself, you would think, wow, he's not changed very much in this at all. I do review every day. The first thing I do, and I missed that out when I was speaking about it there, is I review what I've written the day before. And so by the time I get to the end of a manuscript, I'm pretty happy that it all works pretty well, because I've gone back, I review every day, then I review the whole thing a couple of times, and I'm usually quite satisfied that it all hangs together pretty well. And yeah, an editor may come back and say, well, what about this and what about that? But at the end of the day, it's interesting to have that point of view, but 9 times out of 10, I stick to my own.
You're many books down now. So you've done this system, this process quite a lot. You mentioned the review at the start of every day, which helps your first draft be quite close to your final draft. Have you spotted that that process is easier, that you've got a lot better because you've done this a few times now at kind of getting it done first time without much need to change things, just because you understand the way that you write and you know how to get it pretty bob on first time you get these words down?
I'm always conscious of overworking things. And I know writers that do that, and they agonize over sentences and passages and paragraphs. And they do this for days and days on end. And I'm determined not to be like that. And yeah, of course, you get better at a thing the more you do it. That's just human nature. When I first started writing To Put You in the Picture, Dan, I was ill, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have anything to do. I couldn't work. So I was sitting with a lot of time in my hands, and I'd always wanted to write a book. So I thought, well, right, shall I start the research? And I thought, well, I'm not going to be very good at that because I'd rather just get on with the book. So I picked the 2 things that I knew best, which was Kintyre, where I'm from, and the police force, which I was in. And I chose to write a contemporary crime novel set in Kintyre. And I had about a year and a half to write this, something like that, because there was no pressure of a deadline or anything of that nature. And I meandered along it, and I finished the book, and then I sent it out just to see how, with no expectations it would be successful or I'd get published, anything like that, but just as an exercise to see how the whole thing worked. And then lo and behold, about 2 months after I sent it out, at first I was offered a publishing contract. But yeah, it was interesting how it worked. But then you're faced with the second novel, and you are under time pressure. So you've got X amount of time to finish it. And that was a very different experience from my initial one. But the more you do that, the easier it becomes, and the more natural it becomes. So yeah, I think though, if you do anything in life, even if you're not very good at it, you'll get from one level up to another in your head and your kind of world, and improve, even though that improvement might not be very good.
I might be painting with broad brushstrokes here, so please correct me if I'm wrong. So, like your previous work, you worked as a police officer and worked as various company directors, and managed distilleries, it would seem, which sounds so fantastically Scottish, I can't describe it to you. Now, writing a novel seems quite a different skill set to some of those works, right? I'd say, again, painting with big stereotypes here, but when you're writing a novel, you're in your own head being creative solely on your own, whereas directing companies and being a police officer seems to me to be slightly different skill sets, as I say. When you were writing that first novel over the course of 18 months, how much adapting did you need to do, and the way that you do things?
Well, my life had changed quite markedly because of my illness. I suffered from very bad, or still suffer from very bad, psoriatic arthritis, which is the most pernicious form of the disease. And literally, I was floored. Moving was exceptionally difficult, and so my whole life had kind of changed anyway. But even within the jobs I'd done before, and by the way, managing a distillery is a fantastic thing to do. It was my happiest, amongst some of my happiest times. You know, it was really, really good. Worked with some great people in Campbelltown, where I was from, and it was I have some really fond memories of the people and things that happened. I used to go home sore laughing every night. It was such a good place to work. But that aside, in any job, if you work in an office, as you're say in charge of a company or whatever, you have to work a lot of time on your own, because you'll have reports to put together, you'll have promotions to put together, you'll have meetings to, all the stuff that you have to do and can only be done by you. You've got to sit down and focus on it. So in that respect, writing is no different. Writing's just another process. And so I didn't find the change from being around people and certainly writing is a very isolating kind of occupation. And it's strange in that it's two-headed, in that you've got these months on end where you sit down in a darkened room and write away. And then all of a sudden you're on the radio or you're on the TV and you're speaking about it to people like yourself, and it's all go, So it's strange from that point of view. But then, of course, once you get into it, you're writing. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment. I'm publicizing another, which is about to come out, and I'm editing another one. So I'm currently, in a way, working on 3 books at the one time and the television show. So I don't think you get time to feel the isolation. But I know that some writers do feel it and feel very, especially if they've had acting working lives where they've been in amongst people, and that loneliness gets them. But it doesn't particularly bother me. I think, as long as you've got a good support network, I think you're fine.
We mentioned sympathy towards other writers earlier on. With your background of work and with your attitude to the way that you should be working, and 2,000 words is quite an amount to get done a day. How sympathetic are you with yourself when it's not going so well? Or is it just a case of keeping on trucking, keep on, carry on, and all of that?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, I'm very critical of myself when I don't get things done the way I want, or how I want, or in the time space that I want. If I get to the end of the day and I've not done my 2,000 words, if you'd asked me this question 6 years ago, I'd have been very much more critical of myself than I am now, because then I was just sitting writing books really and not doing any of the ancillary stuff. But now I've got to accept and be realistic about the facts that I'm doing so much else that you don't want to make yourself ill by doing this and become obsessive about it. So yeah, I'll sort of tut or shake my head at the MacBook if I've not done a 2,000 words. But in essence, you have to work as you work. It's part of the exigencies of writing. You have to be pragmatic about it and shrug your shoulders and say, well, okay, didn't do it today, but there are mitigating circumstances. And I play them back in my head as well. I think, well, I had a podcast to do. I had to write about a dozen long emails. I'm still writing this piece for the newspapers. I've got a production meeting on Zoom later on, and all that kind of stuff. So you can, as long as you can justify it, or I can justify it in my own mind, I'm pretty, relaxed about it. But if I and I do get days where, like everyone else does, and I just can't be bothered, and everything's a real struggle. They don't come very often, but they do happen. And that's when I get most annoyed at myself, because then I feel as though I'm playing catch up. And those are the most difficult days. But normally, as long as I can justify not writing 2,000 words or not writing any words because I was doing other things, I can get past it without too much concern. angst.
There is a point to where I'm leading this, but do tell me if this is too blunt a question. Just looking at psoriatic arthritis, may I ask how kind of mobile you are?
Well, I can get about, but in 2017, I'd been feeling ill for a while, apart from the arthritis, and I was taken to hospital. They didn't know what was wrong with me, and it ended up after them making mistake after mistake after mistake that I had an undiagnosed heart condition. So I nearly died. My heart was down to 11% function by the time they discovered what was wrong. And it was probably a result of I was receiving a very new biological treatment for the arthritis. And that nearly killed me. It wasn't managed properly at all by the clinicians. And so once you've been through that kind of experience, you tend to look at life anew and think, well, I very easily might not have been here. And so I do get about, I don't obsess about things the way I used to. I'm much more relaxed than I was before. I don't worry as much because ultimately, what's the point in worrying? Because, as long as you're doing all you can to mitigate any circumstance you come across, then worrying's not going to do anything for you other than stress you out. So my health issues have I'll not lie, sometimes it's difficult, and anybody who has arthritis will tell you that it comes and goes. You have good days and bad days, and when the bad days are bad, they're agony, and when the good days are good, they're good. And that sounds very simplistic, but it's not. Anyone who suffers from arthritis will tell you that, it's one of the most painful things that can possibly happen to you.
I only ask that because, and it sounds so trite now, but it is kind of the purpose that we're here. A lot of authors will tell me when they are struggling, when the words aren't coming, they'll get themselves up and they'll go for a walk. And I just wondered, like how the balance of that is with you. So when you're finding it tough, Denzil, as I said, I know it sounds trite, but what do you do that maybe helps out the words?
I don't really get times when I don't know who wrote about writer's block just being a state of mind, but I agree. I think might have been Stephen King, actually. He seems to have written everything else about writing, but I don't really have those times. I sit down, write, finish, and then move on. And I tend to, if I'm really having a bad day, and it's not usually because of just the writing, it's because of external factors as well. Normally, I just give up, put my hands at this. It's the great joy of being self-employed, Dan. You can look at the clock, and it's 2 in the afternoon. You just say, "Oh, bugger it! I'm just not. That's it. I'm not doing anything else today because I don't feel like it." So when I stop, I don't reach out for inspiration and desperately try to get back to it. I just sit and I zen out, and that's it really. That's my my break, if you like.
How about this then? This really is the most simple question, but there is a lot of purpose to it. What font do you write with, Denzil?
Calabria.
Oh, Calabria. Do I have it here?
I always use Calabria for some reason that is unknown to me. But it's on. You can certainly get it in MacBooks, which I write on through most of my career. I've written on MacBooks. Calabria.
Okay, so one last question before we get on to the new novel. And
sure.
I have had many authors on this show, crime authors, who are Scottish. I have had many crime authors on this show who are police officers. You fit right in the Venn diagram of that. How much did it always feel like this is a place where you would find yourself writing crime stories from a naturally British Scottish perspective?
Not. I mean, I never thought I'd end up writing novels at all. But 2 points in that. I mean, my then publisher, because I've moved since the beginning of the daily novels, they made a lot about me being a police officer. But I was a police officer in the 80s. I spent a lot longer in business and doing other things than I was ever a police officer. But I didn't begin writing until 2010. So you can see there's a huge gap there when I was doing other things. And my situation, and we'll probably come to this when we talk about Holly House, but my mother was born in Hull. My father was born in London from a Welsh family. So while I was brought up in Scotland and born in Scotland, I do consider myself to be British. And so I don't fit into the kind of hard-bitten, gritty Scottish crime novelist that doesn't really exist, honestly. So it wasn't a career I ever envisaged of myself. I always thought that writing would be unattainable and that having a book published would be unattainable, because you hear the apocryphal stories about how these things happen and come about, and slush piles and, manuscripts becoming ignored, just going straight in the bin and all that kind of stuff. And so you just think, well, the chances of doing that are, I'm always pretty grounded, good and bad. I've had failure and success in my life, and I never get too hung up on the failure, and I never get too enthusiastic about success, because, they're both sides of the same coin. So the Scottishness, to be honest, I think that there has been a boom in Scottish crime writing, and there's some of it that is very, very good. And I'm not just talking about Scotland here, but some of it is very, very bad as well. And the onset of self-published writing, and of which some is very, very good, but a great deal is very, very bad too. And I don't necessarily think, I think I've said before that you only have to travel 50 miles in Scotland to get to somewhere that's been books, crime novels written about. So that's the way I view it. And I think within that, there's a kind of encapsulation of Scottish crime writing as being tart noir, a phrase that I despise, because it sticks a label on you. And there are so many, there's such a diversity of writing and which is covered by that umbrella term. And, the Daley novels, I set out to try and do something that was different by, yes, having visceral writing and visceral scenes in the books, but also leavened by humour. And whereas you get the people who are real noirists who write books that are relentlessly dark, and all of us are hiding under this umbrella of tartan noir, and it must confuse readers when they read, if they're new to that kind of subgenre, and they say, oh, tartan noir, well, I've read one book and I really enjoyed it, and they grab, say, mine, and it's entirely different. They must think, well, that's a different genre altogether, So yeah, I think there's a real sort of need to pigeonhole people. I don't think it's always healthy.
We'll be back with more from Denzil in just a second. Remember, you can make the most of that fantastic Plotter deal. They are sponsoring the show for a little while. go.plotter.com/routine. And you can always support the show at patreon.com/writers routine. I know there's a lot of links, but just bear with this. By becoming a backer and pledging to support us at Patreon, you're really helping us carry on. For that, just a few dollars a month really helps us carry on, and it gets you access to bonus content. There is little chats that we have in the community there. We're sharing ideas, we're sharing advice, font tips, book recommendations. It's all there. You get merch, and there is even a way for your book to sponsor this show. So if you've published something recently, maybe self-published, and it's not really gone the way you had hoped, but you found a struggle with getting it out there, I know that is such a common theme. There are so many books published all of the time that simply getting yours published, which seems like the end goal, is often the start of what can be a very tough journey, and I really appreciate that. And if you would like me to plug away on your behalf, I am more than happy to do that. To get involved, it's patreon.com/writers routine. As I say, anything that you can throw over there goes an extraordinarily long way, and I'm very grateful for it. If you would like to help us out and help me bring you these shows as often as we can, get to patreon.com/writers routine. Let's get back to it then with Denzil Meyrick chatting through his novel Murder at Holly House. We're following Inspector Frank Grasby, who is ordered to investigate a strange body that's been found. Only when another one turns up, he gets snowed in and we're in a locked room mystery all of a sudden. In this part, we chat about finding inspiration in unusual places, also why he wanted to write something completely different than his normal stuff, and we pick things up running through how his past work, directing companies and being in the police and even managing distilleries, has all taken different paths to influence his writing.
I think as you go through life, regardless of what you do and what you achieve or don't achieve, you're always learning about yourself, and you're always learning about the world. And so from the jobs I've had, I've learned, I think when I started off working life, I was quite malleable and, I aimed to please, employers or whatever. And I realized that's not always the best way ahead, sit down and do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay is fair enough, but people will walk over you in life. And now I'm not very easily walked over, and I'll stand my ground on just about anything. And if I believe I'm right, I'll back myself to the hilt on that. So I think that working in the places that I did and the industries that I did gave me that kind of education, if you like, because you're always learning all the time. And I worked with some really good people, really clever people, people who you would think would be and were the nicest people about. And then all of a sudden, when it came to a working environment and something didn't go right, they made sure it was fixed, and they would fix it any way possible to their satisfaction. So I think I've had a lot of steel added to my character over the last 30 odd years. And I think it's stood me in good stead, if you like, because I think you need that steel. You certainly need that steel when you're writing, because, you're open to very public criticism. And if you didn't have that, you'd tend to collapse under the weight of it all.
So let's get to the new novel then. It's a departure from DCI Daley. This is Murder at Holly House, Denzil. Just take us through the very first moment that the idea for this story came into your head.
Well, I'd wanted to do something different, but, because I'd written the 11 Dailies and I wrote a standalone gangster novel and nostalgic novellas set in Kintyre in the 60s. And it was really then that there was a trilogy of them all published around Christmas time. And it was then that the idea for Murder at Holly House came about. And I started writing the novellas just during COVID. And we might come to this later, but I think there has been a sea change in what people reading habits since COVID was such a horrible, tragic, stressful, disgusting time for the world that I think people had enough, for a while at least, of real horror and cut 'em up crime novels. And I took the little novellas, which weren't really crime novels, they were more tales of these pair of fishermen, the Kinloch tales, which are now out in an anthology form. And I thought, well, what could I do this? I don't want to be stuck in writing about this imaginary Kinloch or the real Kintyre the rest of my life. I'd like to like something nostalgic. I'd like to like something slightly historical. And with my mum being from Yorkshire and us visiting Yorkshire when I was a kid, every year, and then later on in life going to Yorkshire a lot myself with the family and everything else, I thought, well, I have experience of the county. It's one of my favourite places. I have roots there. And Grasby appealed to me. I've always been a great fan of Evelyn Waugh's writing and P.G. Woodhouse and people like that. Yeah, Mark Twain and George MacDonald Fraser, who all kind of write in that similar vein. If you were to read the Flashman novels, for instance, and then read a bit of Mark Twain, the similarities are amazing. It's as though you're reading the same writer virtually. And George MacDonald Please was a fabulous writer. And so I thought, well, I'll write something about that. And then again, the changing to the first person for Murder at Holly House, that was new to me because it'd always been the third person I'd written it in. And so I wanted to try all these things and try something different. And if it failed, it failed. And if it succeeded, it succeeded. But thankfully, it was picked up by Transworld, which are, Penguin Random House's big genre imprint in the UK, which I was delighted about. And Finn Cotton, who's my editor, is a fabulous young man and who's destined for the very top in publishing. I predict, because of the way he works and his sheer intelligence that surrounds his job and the way he approaches things. And that's how it really came about. And, because I'd admired these authors that we've just spoken about, they certainly inspired me to do that, combined with the little novellas I'd written myself. And I thought, well, it's good to write something uplifting at Christmas time. And I wouldn't want to do it all the time. But then again, I don't want to write the same kind of books all the time anyway, I don't really believe in being I'm always referred to as a Scottish crime writer. I would rather just be referred to as a writer, because I could come out with something that isn't really crime at all, and I have done. And again, it's this need to pigeonhole people, to label them and put them in a box. I'm not good at boxes.
How difficult is that switch? I know as a writer, not boxing yourself, you should be able to easily you should be able to turn your hand to completely different styles and genres of writing. But like in practice, it's not always that simple, especially as you've written 11 novels in one place and in one style. But like being inspired by some of the great comedic authors like Evelyn Waugh and P.G. Wodehouse, and writing in this different viewpoint that you mentioned, suddenly moving to first person. How did you find that change? How much readjusting did you have to do?
Very little. You're absolutely right what you said. If you're a writer, you should be able to write in various styles and about various things. I always joke with my people on social media that say, "Oh, when's the next Daily due out?" And I say, "Well, I'm having a complete change, but I'm sure you'll enjoy the book. I'm writing a retrospective of Norman architecture from 1067 to 1222." And there's, you can hear the pause on the social media. Oh, right, yeah, oh, great, wow. Look forward to reading it, when you actually think they're just going, "Oh my God, I'm going to read that in a billion years." But it's good. And it's the old maxim, a change is as good as a rest, isn't it? And if you're in the middle of writing a long running series, and Daley is going to continue, alongside other things like Grasby and a novel that's another brand new thriller that I have coming out next summer, God willing, I think that, I love writing Grasby because I don't have to think up gruesome deaths. There are murders in it, but we don't dwell on them. They're murders because they're murders, and he has to have something to investigate. But it is lighthearted in its tone, but it's a real story at the same time. It's not just tea and scones with a vicar, if you know what I mean. It's a genuine, I'd like to call it a cozy thriller rather than a cozy crime novel. But I've been pigeonholed again with that. But yeah, it's good to do something different, and it's refreshing, and it's amazing how when we talked about being involved in what was the benefits of writing a long running series and the advantages of it. It was good to be able to start with a white page and do something new. And I really enjoyed that. And I still enjoy it. And I'm writing the second one as we speak. And I'm finding that just as uplifting as I did the first time round.
It's interesting what you said earlier about COVID changing people's attitudes to things. I know that I found it not necessarily with books, but with things that I watch on telly. I'm I'm much less interested in something unless I know that it might have a happy ending. Like, I really can't be dealing with grisly, with too heavy murders that are pointless. I really don't want to be made to watch sad in the hour that I allocate myself to watch something on Netflix, right? And particularly since lockdown. And, I'm looking at my bookshelf here, and I've got stuff there by Janice Hallett. There's a Richard Osman cozy crime. There's that word novel, and like, just reflecting on that, they have come around and they have been big since lockdown. I wonder how much did that affect when you were working on daily books and working on more traditional crime, in air quotes there. How much you thought about the idea that do people really want to read like a proper murder anymore?
Yeah, I think that market will always exist. I think it's the nuance that changes, and there, people for a while, and counterintuitively, during lockdown, books about contagion and all that kind of thing were selling well. I think Peter May wrote a book about a scarily similar situation to COVID about 3 or 4 years before COVID happened. And when it happened, this book sold like hotcakes. So different people have different approaches to things, but in a general sense, I believe that there was a real national and international need for something to cheer us all up. I think we needed cheering, and we needed something that's going to take away this misery and tragedy that we'd all been through. And let's be honest, so many people lost those dear to them in terrible and awful ways that were unimaginable only a few months before COVID hit. And for me, even in the daily novels, my inspiration for writing the daily novels was, part of the inspiration was The Sopranos. Because The Sopranos, but all the really ghastly things that happens and Tony Soprano does, there's so much humor and comedy and great acting and great dialogue and everything else about it's fabulous that it leavens that. And that's what I wanted to do with Daley. And it's what I've done with Murder at Holly House in a kind of different way, because Frank Grasby, who's the detective in Murder at Holly House, is kind of, he's hapless, but he's capable, if you know what I mean. And he can have moments of great inspiration, but he's very self-reflective and of his past and his future, and kind of a struggle to fit in as a person. And so you can write even a crime novel without it being a slash and burn job, And I'm always conscious of, we know what's going on in the world at the moment, which is also harrowing, even though it's at a remove for us, or for most of us, not all of us, who have family in the Middle East or in Ukraine and Russia and whatever. But there will always be times in the human, within the human race, the human condition dictates that we will have really, really bad things going on, and we have to live through them. And I think, depending on personality, depending on what you like, depending on how you feel, a little bit of something different is good. And especially around Christmas time, because Christmas is such a nostalgic time. And I know I read different books at Christmas than I do in other times of the year. And so the Grasby thing came about because of that, really. It was the need to do something different. It was the need to entertain without, entertaining through something horrible and visceral and nasty and repellent. And I know that people read crime novels for vicarious reasons, because, you're reading a crime novel and you have the similar feelings to being in danger yourself, but you can put the book down and everything's all right. It's that vicarious thrill. And you can also have a vicarious happiness as well. So that's what I'm balancing it much more with Grasby and Murder at Holly House than I am with Daley.
With Murder at Holly House, you mentioned way earlier on in our chat that you like a beginning, a middle and an end. How much did you know about this story before you sat down to write? We've spoken about the inspiration and the comedic authors that it came from, but how much did you know about the plot when you started typing the first sentence?
I knew that I wanted him to be in a village that was snowbound in North Yorkshire at Christmas time. I knew I wanted him to investigate something that wasn't just a murder at the vicarage. And so I proceeded along those lines. The main plot really came to me as I wrote the book. And so it was probably one of the books I had least idea about before I started writing it. But it came very quickly. I wrote it in about 4 months, I think, which is quick for me. I usually, I probably more like 6 months to write a book and review it and get it ready for sending out. So but I was delighted with the way it came. I mean, you sometimes get characters and you invent characters that the story comes out of them, if you like. That sounds very pretentious and obscure and arcane. But, you have a character will fit into a certain scenario really well. And from that scenario, you'll come across, you can move forward. And that's very much what happened with Grasby. And there was also an element, I don't know if you remember the program Heartbeat.
I didn't watch it too much, I'll be honest, but I know it existed. Well,
Heartbeat was a hugely popular show for 20 odd years on British television. It was a staple of Sunday nights for many, many people for years. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was a great escapism. And it was that kind of vibe, the same as Grasby's. It was that, things were happening and bad things were sometimes happening, but it was the nostalgia of being in the 1960s with these cops in this small village in North Yorkshire. And it was only when I'd written it, I realized, well, there's something of Heartbeat in this as well, And for those who miss Heartbeat every Sunday night, well, they can read Murder at Holly House because it'll take them to a similar place, if not the same place.
Last question then, looking forward, I know you've written standalone books before, but maybe not exactly in this guise as opposed to novellas. How has writing this maybe influenced and changed the way that you might write future books and even dip your foot back in the Daley world? How has this changed things?
Well, of course, the writer has writ and then writes again and moves on, or whatever that quote is. I have writ and I moved on to, I've already written the next book, which is the thriller I touched on earlier, which is a proper, international thriller called The Estate, which is up for pre-order now and everyone's very excited about. I think the Grasby experience, and again, as I said, I'm writing the next Grasby as we speak, and then I'll be writing Daley after that. So it's reassured me that I can write different things and not just stick, just be saddled with Daley. And saddled, it sounds a nasty thing to say, but everyone wants to do different things as we've spoken about, and it's nice to have that, the feeling that you can do it if you want to, if you get my drift. So I've been reassured by the fact that, I can do different stuff. And in way in the future, I'd like to write something out with crime and thriller altogether. I'd like to do something very different. And I'm more reassured about that as well, that if I decide to do that and if anyone will take it, which is, of course, another problem that every writer faces, that you can, I could sit down and write a science fiction novel or a fantasy novel or a so-called literary fiction or whatever else. I can do that and be reasonably confident that I can get it done and get it done reasonably well, hopefully.
How about the Norman history of architecture in the 13th century?
It's bubbling away in the background, Dan. We never know when that'll come out. I've spent a lot of time traipsing around churches in the south of England doing brass rubbings. And you never know when, and I don't think it'll sell as well as Daley and Holly House, but stranger things have happened.
And that is it with Denzil Meyrick on the show. That brand new novel is Murder at Holly House. Now, next week we are chatting to Femi Kayode about his brand new Why Done It novel, Gaslight. He'll be with us next week. In the meantime, make the most of that Plotter deal. Go.plotter.com/routine. You can always support the show too at patreon.com/writersroutine. You can get in touch with us using the contact page at writersroutine.com, and make sure you follow us on socials. It's a variation of @WritersPod or Writers Routine. Give us a search. You'll find us for daily videos that boost you and hopefully give you some inspiration for your own work. And I will see you next week with Femi Kayode on the show. Until then, bye.